Hello, welcome. Hello, welcome back to Pause It For Me. Hannah, do you have any strong opinions about subtitles on comedy specials?
Yeah, I do. So the movies that we're talking about today are subtitled because they were in French and we don't know that much French.
Francais.
Francais. And I tend to watch...
You watch stuff with subtitles anyway.
Mostly. So I don't mind when the subtitles are good.
What do you mean good?
Sometimes there's like really great subtitling. Mm-hmm. Like in Parasite, they went the extra length to do what's it called? Sort of area specific, like the cultural differences like they do with Pixar movies.
What?
They'll like change something to make it more culturally relevant.
Okay.
They did that in the subtitles for Parasite.
I don't know if there's a name for that, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So I appreciate when people go to good lengths, especially for people that actually need it, the hearing impaired, to have the right words for lip flaps and stuff like that. And, you know, I love stuff with subtitles. And for comedy specials, it's so annoying when they're so lazy and they'll just put the next line before the comedian says it. Usually the punchline, and I'll read the punchline before the comedian actually says it, which ruins the comedic timing.
Yeah, I found that was the case with the second movie that we watched today. We watched The 400 Blows, and we watched... Geez, I already forgot the name.
Breathless.
This is part 2 of our international movie marathon. We're doing some French language movies that Hannah picked out. Hannah, why don't you intro these movies, and then we can dive right into what we liked and what we didn't like.
I feel like it's going to be a didn't like for you, but we'll see.
What makes you say that? I'm actually asking.
I just think sometimes you're more of a traditionalist when it comes to cinema.
Okay.
Like, you don't like visual nonsense just for nonsense sake.
Okay. Well, it's like you're jumping right into my brain.
Well, I know you. Yeah. I'll get into it.
So this is you're, surmising what you think I thought based on the content of the movie itself, not necessarily my body language during the movie.
Well, I was mostly looking at the screen, especially for the second one, which I hadn't seen. I've seen the first one, The 400 Blows. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
Okay. So The 400 Blows, that's obviously the English translation.
Mm-hmm. A pretty literal translation, it seems.
It is a literal translation, but it culturally doesn't make sense to us.
Right.
Which we'll go into.
Like it's a colloquialism.
Yes.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay. Because that was my first question.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Okay. So the log line is, a young boy left without attention delves into a life of petty crime. It's like, okay,
solid
that's pretty basic. Yeah, but that's pretty much it.
That's what it's about.
Okay.
Your whipped cream that I put on top of your coffee has very nicely melted into what now looks like a latte, even though it's not.
Yeah, no, I'm into it.
Probably delicious.
Yeah, okay. So, the English title of the movie, 400 Blows, is...
Are we jumping into trivia already? You got to do the sting.
Hannah's Trivia Corner.
There you go.
I just think it's, we should talk about it now since we were already sort of talking about it.
Of course. 400
Blows is a gross misinterpretation of the original title.
Okay.
The original title stems from the French expression faire les 400 coups.
Quatre. Like 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's like 400, whatever. Well, cents means 100. Okay, yeah. Meaning to live a wild life.
Oh.
So it's I don't know why.
Why does it mean that?
I don't know. I mean, think about the English language. There's a lot of things that we say that doesn't necessarily like translate to what it actually is.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's just what it is. As the main character does, to live a wild life.
Mm-hmm.
And the literal translation would be
because I had 2 questions coming out of that movie. And that was my first question, was what the heck does the title mean?
So the expression, if we were to say it like more in a way that would make more sense is to do the 400 dirty tricks or like pranks or like whatever. So I guess it's sort of an expression like you're doing 400 crazy things.
Okay.
To live a wild life.
Okay.
So it's like, I don't know. If they had named it like Wild Thing or like, I don't know, something more English, like it would have maybe made more sense, but that's basically what
come on, people. This is America. We speak English. I'm kidding.
No, I just, I think it's just lost in translation for us. I would have maybe preferred they just kept the French title or, I don't know, something.
I mean, some anime, they translate the title literally, and it's like, we still remember the name of the flower we saw that day. It's like, oh okay. Yeah. Really weird title in English.
Well, it's, English has like very weird, one flew over a cuckoo's nest. How is that translated into other languages? Like, that's not going to, I don't think that's going to make any sense. Anyways. So this movie was nominated for an Oscar for Best Writing Story Screenplay.
Nominated for an Oscar?
Yeah.
Okay.
When it came out. Yeah.
Right.
For Best Writing.
At the Oscars?
Yes.
Like at
the Academy Awards.
Okay.
International films aren't excluded. There just usually isn't a lot of them.
Okay, yeah,
so that should speak to the volumes of how well received this movie was. That it got an Oscar nom. And at Cannes?
Cannes? I don't know how to say it.
I don't know either.
Just say it the Mr. Bean way. Cannes.
Francois Truffaut won Best Director and was nominated for a Palme d'Or, which is like Best in Show. And so it was released at the end of 1959. And then Breathless was released in 1960. And those two films are kind of like the huge break into the new genre, French New Wave.
Okay. And so while we were watching it, or like just after we finished it, you said you thought that 400 Blows was Truffaut's first film. Was that correct? Did you fact check that? Okay.
Yes. So he wrote and directed it. Yeah. Okay. And Breathless, the original scenario was written by Francois Truffaut. Like they were in the same sort of film circle. Like they knew each other. It's like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg teaming up. It's like it's the same sort of vibe collaborator. So I think it made sense as a double feature.
#buds.
Because I had another movie in mind.
What movie?
It was like Cleo 9 to 5, something like that.
9 to 5 with Dolly Parton?
Yeah. I probably have it wrong, but it was a different director, different. So I just thought this was more of a better double feature.
Sure.
Since it was basically the birth of French New Wave. Okay.
So you had seen 400 Blows already.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me about your first experience with it and why you wanted to watch it again?
Okay, so the first time I watched it was on a bus to visit you when we were dating. So I used to watch movies that I missed out on my laptop on the way to visits. Like I watched Jaws on a laptop, which I still haven't rewatched. Nice. So I feel like some of the grandioseness of that cinematography was lost on me. 400 Blows, fine to watch on a laptop. You know, it's I think while there is great cinematic moments, I don't think anything was super lost watching in a smaller space. That being said, it looked way better on the bigger screen.
It did look pretty nice, I will say.
Except you were annoyed about hairs in the gate.
Yeah, well, it's because, like, I thought we watched a Criterion restoration, and I'm like, if you're going to restore it, get rid of that.
I think it was Criterion number 5. So it was like one of the first restored.
Well, do it again then.
Okay, so...
You know what? Hang on. I want to go off on tangent for a second. Anytime I've watched a Criterion restoration of like an older movie, like a black and white movie typically, they always bungle the fades. Have you noticed that? Anytime they do a cross dissolve between two shots, as soon as the cross dissolve starts and as soon as it ends, it like jumps to lower quality. Because I guess they just have a harder time restoring film when it's two pieces of film fading into each other.
That's possible.
But it's so jarring.
Well, you know what my thought process is on this, and I don't know if it was intentional or not. My thought process is they're restoring it to how you would have saw it as an original cinema goer. Not to perfection, quote unquote perfection, like George Lucas.
That's fair in the first thing that you said. I don't think George Lucas is restoring his film to perfection.
It is.
The line that I draw with updating a film is you should restore it to what the director's intention was at the time. So if the director was in like the 40s, 50s, 70s, whatever, and they made a mistake, and he was like, oops, he or she was like, oops, I didn't mean to leave that in or whatever, then cut it out.
No.
But if
that's part of the charm of the original experience.
If they made a mistake that they didn't mean to make, like leaving a hair in the gate or like botching, an effect or whatever, then it's like, okay, just maybe like clean it up a bit and live your life, right? But then where George Lucas goes is he's like, well, this is what I want to do now that I couldn't do then. So at the time I was okay with this, but now I don't like it. And it's like, okay, that you shouldn't do. Because if something was intentional at the time, then you should leave it alone.
I actually don't care that he does it. What I have a problem with is that we don't have access to the original version.
Right.
If it was like, okay, here's the original, how it was seen in theaters version, Criterion copy, Star Wars, A New Hope. Mm-hmm. That'd be perfect. And then, we have George Lucas's updated version, this is how I wanted it version.
Right.
I think, for film history, we should have the original. Mm-hmm. So I don't like that he's like, nope, I didn't like what I did before. I feel like mistakes is part of art. Like, they say that, like Bob Ross says, there's no mistakes, only happy accidents.
But I think there's a difference between a mistake that leads to something interesting in the story of the film or in the world of the film versus a mistake that takes you out of the film. So like, I'll jump ahead a little bit. In Breathless, I feel like every 20 minutes, there was like 5 black frames left in the middle of a shot where like you're watching a shot and then all of a sudden there's like 5 frames of black and then the shot just continues. If that was intentional on the director's part, then I have no earthly idea what he was trying to do with that, because to me, that seems like just a massive screw up. And if you're restoring a film, take it out.
I'm thinking it was a screw up, but I think for Criterion copies, they're restoring it to how you would have seen it as the original viewer. So like we are getting the experience that everyone experienced when they first saw it.
I don't want that. I want the best possible experience.
I suppose. I can see both ways. I appreciate the authenticity is all I'm saying.
I don't know.
There should be 2 versions. There should be the slightly cleaned up version that's nicer. Like a lot of people had problems with Let It Be, that they sharpened the film footage so it looks nicer. And I loved it. Well, but some people were like, that's not the original integrity of the film shots.
It was the opposite. They didn't sharpen it. They like denoisified it.
That's right, yeah.
But we were watching it and we were like, wow, there's no film grain. This looks amazing.
Yeah, and I thought it looked amazing, but people were like, oh, it's losing its original essence, blah, blah,
Shut
blah,
up.
Blah. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I have opinions about film style and that kind of stuff in general. Yeah. In regards to French New Wave and modern cinema that I think we will go into at some points.
Okay. Well, then I will throw this at you. Can you define in your own words what French New Wave is? Because we studied it in school and I don't remember it at all. And I will say that these 2 films definitely had a unique style. Yes. One more than the other. But I can't quite say what it is in exact terms. So do you have a standby definition for French New Wave?
Not necessarily a word for word definition, but more the vibe.
Okay.
So if you're thinking about when this came out, it's the beginning of the 60s, which is, sort of the hippie movement, beatnik era, They were trying to be very subversive to previous cinema. Like if you think of, you know, what came out a couple years before that, Rebel Without a Cause, Sunset Boulevard, more like melodramatic features, which were still great, just different.
Yeah, melodramatic. That's fair.
I think what French New Wave has done, and we see this a lot more in modern cinema, this kind of style, it's a little more documentary style. Cinema verite is what they called it in school, where it's like a lot of the lines are improvised. We're shooting on real locations with real sound. You know, we're keeping it as realistic as possible. People are wearing their actual clothing. You know, it's based on people's lives and stuff. So it's trying to give this very authentic look. And sometimes that means like sacrificing quote unquote beauty or perfection that you would see in a traditional film.
Sure.
Where you would do a lot of different takes. You would have to get the lines right. The shot would have to be perfect. The editing would have to be perfect. And they're being subversive, saying, you know, we're just trying to create an interesting story. If you're too caught up in all that stuff, then you're not really getting it. And they're like trying to do something unique, sort of Andy Warhol factory-esque, where they're like, you know, we're going against what was the norm and kind of creating something avant-garde.
Trying to make something that feels more real.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can get behind that. I will say that one of these two movies I felt did that very well.
Yes.
And the other, I got some opinions.
Breathless, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I will say that the 400 Blows, I think, is probably one of my, at least top 100, if not top 50, top 30 films.
I thought it was a nice little movie.
It was great.
I definitely enjoyed it. Yeah. Cute little story, sad story.
Sad story, yeah.
I followed it pretty well. There was a point halfway through where I asked to pause, and then I closed my eyes and it was silent for like a full minute or two. I don't know if you remember that. I was committing the first half of the movie to my own mind because I didn't want to lose it. I was like, okay, let's retrace our steps, make sure I know what's going on here. Okay. Walking through in my head. Okay, I got it. Let's continue. Just to make sure that I didn't lose my place and I wasn't like, wait, who's that? What? Right? Which I felt like was what ended up happening with Breathless, even though I was trying to follow along, but like, well, we'll get to Breathless. Okay. But 400 Blows, yeah, I enjoyed it. Thought the acting was good. I thought it looked quite nice.
Yeah, it definitely looked nice.
It was a nice sort of CinemaScope-esque widescreen as opposed to Breathless. So I thought it held up. It looked nice.
I think it was one of the first French films to be anamorphic.
Right.
At the time. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. It felt like it had a more consistent story. And like it was really going for something. And I think it was a great slice of life type movie, coming of age movie, where it's like we kind of get during like context clues, and then he kind of explains things later on in the movie, why he is the way he is, you know, the way he is, you know, like. So at the end, there's sort of more of like an interview thing, which was actually the actor's screen test with Francois Truffaut, and then he just redubbed the questions to a female psychiatrist because he liked the authenticity that the actor gave.
Really?
Yeah.
That was the screen test.
Apparently.
And so that was just his answers, or those were scripted?
No, those were his improvised answers.
Oh, improvised answers.
In character.
Okay. In character.
So it's like,
that's very interesting.
So I think maybe like I've seen like a Harry Potter screen test where Daniel Radcliffe did that. It's kind of like, you know, just to see if someone can embody the character.
Yeah. I liked the vibe of the movie. I didn't feel like it was trying to tell any sort of like massive, grand weight emotional story. Yeah. It was just like you said, a slice of life, sort of like bit mumblecore-esque.
Yeah, I was into it. I actually do quite like most mumblecore. Sometimes I can be like, this is a little too pretentious.
Yeah.
This is
how I felt about Breathless.
Well, I think it's maybe more pretentious in retrospect because the types of people that would think it was an amazing movie would be maybe pretentious.
So back to 400 Blows. So you liked it the first time.
Yeah.
And what made you want to rewatch it?
So I wanted to show it to you and I wanted to see it again because I liked it a decent amount. Like the last scene in particular, I remember like really grabbed me.
Okay.
Like with the zoom in. I either it could go either way where it's like the zoom in is like kind of wild and crazy to like the boy's face.
You're saying
Anton.
It can go either way in terms of like gripping you and making you feel a certain way versus making you laugh and being like, this is ridiculous. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It was kind of both for me. I was like, oh, okay, like he finally gets to go to the ocean because he never got to go to the ocean before. And he like has this moment where he's finally free. But then also it's kind of like, it's kind of silly. Well,
it was the one point in the movie that made me raise my eyebrow. Because I was like, nothing in the movie could have prepared me for that zoom in, that freeze frame zoom in with his confused looking face.
But it's so iconic though.
But I agree with what you said that it's a make or break kind of thing where you're either gripped by it or you laugh at it. And I was thinking about this today is in Jesus Christ Superstar in Gethsemane, if I'm saying that right.
Gethsemane.
Yeah. And that song in the movie version of it, when there's like a musical interlude where there's no vocals at a certain part during that song. And he goes, just watch me die. And then they do a bunch of like snap zooms into, different depictions of Jesus getting crucified.
Right.
I think that's exactly one of those moments where you're either like totally gripped by it and it makes you feel like emotional, or you just are completely bewildered by its ridiculousness and you can't take it seriously. Yeah. So I feel like we had opposite reactions. Is for Jesus Christ Superstar, that moment I was like, wow, the weight of his death and crucifixion in this moment is really like slamming in my face right now. Whereas I think you thought it was funny versus 400 Blows, where you're saying you were gripped by that moment and I thought it was funny.
I thought it was funny, especially upon rewatch because I was prepared for it.
Yeah.
But the first time I saw it, I was just enjoying the movie. But it is definitely silly.
It's also one of those things where, like, if you watch it alone, I think you're more likely to be gripped by something silly because you're just like, it's whatever your authentic reaction is. But if you're sitting next to someone, it dawns on you quicker how crazy it is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was a bold choice.
It was great though. I mean, like, that's the 400 Blows. That's what makes it part of it special. Happy or only happy accidents.
You know what else it reminded me of? It reminded me of the very end. You're not gonna know. You're not gonna know what the ending of this is, and that's okay. Maybe you will someday. It reminded me of the very end, very 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 end of Red Dead Redemption 1. Mm-hmm. If you have played that game and you know how it ends, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. It kind of has a similar ending where it's just like kind of a quiet moment and then all of a sudden it's like, bam, that's it. It's over. We're done. And it's like, wow, there it is.
I mean, I do love that in a movie. I love when there's like sort of a afterglow where it's like, wow, that was a great movie.
I do like those kinds of movies. Yeah.
Because it's like, it reminds me how much I love cinema. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, that was a movie.
Yeah. So going into this French little two-parter here, I wasn't sure what to expect because I hadn't really watched a lot of French cinema. I'd seen Monsieur Lazare.
Oh, that was a good one, though.
It was fine.
but see, that's more traditional cinema. I wanted to go back to the roots where, like, as cinephiles, I feel like it's important for us to have some knowledge about French New Wave.
I agree.
Because, for especially movies like, I was thinking movies like A24, you said Mumblecore, that kind of movie, independent movies that, I love. You generally like most of them. It's in that shared DNA. A movie like Napoleon Dynamite or, all those kinds of movies are because of what came before it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's great to have this introduction to it.
Yeah, so I came out of 400 Blows pleasantly surprised. I was like, that was a cool movie. It gripped me. I wasn't really like looking at my watch.
Yeah.
And so I went into Breathless kind of excited to see what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I found the experience quite dreadful.
Yeah, I don't know. It definitely is turning me off of more Godard films, but you know, it was his first film. Maybe
it showed.
He learned from it. Well, I think this is what I'm seeing a lot in photography lately is deconstruction of the genre. Mm-hmm. So digital cameras are so well done now that photos are super sharp, they're high resolution. So people are wanting to get back to the original form where it's, you know, it's messy, it's grainy, some of the shots are out of focus, it has chromatic aberration, you know, the film style or actual film where it's like, it's imperfect and that's what makes it interesting. I think the same could be said for
that's
French
manufactured.
New Wave.
That's manufactured imperfection, though. So that's pre-ripped jeans.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Like, as a photographer, sometimes I think it's fun to play around with that, but I can't always take seriously when people post like a super blurry photo and they're like, look how good this is. And I'm like, I don't know, like that just doesn't seem like it's talent to me. But, you know, it's sort of that same thing where it's like films were so polished, so perfect on sets with the perfect people, and we're just trying to make it raw and gritty and like go with the flow and everything. Actually, it's a lot of the production of Breathless is pretty mirrored to El Mariachi.
Okay.
So Godard.
Do you want to give a log line for Breathless before we jump in? Just so the audience knows what it's about. It's about a dude with big lips who thinks he's so cool with his six-pack abs and a cigarette.
Does he have six-pack abs?
Well, whatever. I mean, something like that.
So this is the log line. A small-time thief steals a car and impulsively murders a motorcycle policeman. Wanted by the authorities, he reunites with a hip American journalism student and attempts to persuade her to run away with him to Italy. I think the idea itself is interesting, but I think the execution was poor.
Yeah.
It had a lot of interesting stuff.
I didn't really enjoy it. It felt like interesting stuff happened for the first 2 minutes and then nothing for the next 70 minutes. And then some more interesting stuff happened at the end. And everything in the middle didn't really feel like it should have been a movie. It was boring. Well, it wasn't particularly well shot. Yeah. Very poorly edited. And I feel like you're going to say that a lot of those edits were intentional.
Yes and no.
And I will posit that intentionality was rubbish. What was your take? Okay. So, like what I'm talking about is just like constant jump cuts in the middle of scenes, black frames left in everywhere.
The black frames might have been by mistake.
Anytime there was any sense of like something action related happening, like somebody was shooting their gun or like getting stabbed or like whatever happened, just the editing was just bad. I don't know what else to call it other than bad. Like I'm an editor for a career. My day job is editing, and when I saw those scenes, I was like, I feel like they just threw a couple shots together, didn't even watch it, and then moved on. Like they didn't care how it looked. Yeah, it was discombobulating.
Well, I think that's sort of part of it, and so that was part of the charm to certain audiences. So, okay, this was actually the originator of the jump cut. This film.
Okay. Oh, this film.
Yes. Okay, so here's the trivia.
Yeah. Because I'll have something to say as soon as you read this, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, yes and no, it was intentional. So, apparently, the film ran 30 minutes too long for distribution. So, he had to cut it down, but he didn't want to cut any scenes. So, instead of excluding entire scenes, he cut little bits from here and there. And this led to the jump cut technique introduced.
That seems like kind of a lazy solution. That instead of like instead of re-editing your film to still be nicely paced and just shorten it, he was like, just take this out, just take that out. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but like it again, as my day job, I do this a lot where I'll edit a piece together and it's like 5 minutes, but it needs to be 2 minutes, and I need to cut it down to 2 minutes cleanly in a way that still flows nicely and is going to present nicely. So if the editor or the director was like, just cut out all the dead space and just stitch it all together and don't even worry about it, I'm like, well,
yeah.
Do you even really care about the end product?
Well, I see what you're saying. Like, if we did that in film school, I think we would have got an F.
It's breaking the language of filmmaking. Because with a film, you're supposed to have it like, you want it to present like reality, but be an escape from true reality. You want it to suck the audience in so that they're invested in it and they forget the fact that they're watching a movie and they feel like they're in the world and experiencing it. And when you do stuff like that, it takes the viewer out and they're like, oh, I'm watching a movie because now all of a sudden things are jumping around in front of me as they don't in real life. And now I'm very aware that I'm sitting in a seat watching a movie instead of being engrossed in the story.
I definitely think that 400 Blows was more substance over style. And then Breathless was more stylistic than substance. And I think because of all the jump cuts, while at times they were interesting, I think it was a lot harder to follow as an audience member.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was used all that effectively. I think there is instances where editors have used jump cuts in a really creative way for comedic effect or for interesting effect to show
like during
passage
montages.
Of time. Montages for sure. But I feel like that's not a true jump cut. I think a jump cut would be like cutting in the middle of a scene. Like, when the character's like, oh, there's no way you're going to make me go. And then it cuts to them there. It's like, well, sometimes that can be funny. So I just think that jump cuts can be used well, but I don't think they were used well here. But I think it's cool that it at least introduced the idea to filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a hot take, but to me, it just breaks the language of filmmaking. It's like
at times
putting something on screen that doesn't make sense, which like can be nice in an avant-garde sense, but the rest of the movie around this decision to make these jump cuts was not good enough to support the jump cuts. Like it just wasn't an entertaining movie. I didn't find it interesting. The main character was a turd. I hated looking at him.
Yeah.
He just walked around like, I'm cool with my cigarette and I'm going to steal stuff. And I was like,
I found Patricia.
Real mushmouth today.
I know, I can't say the word. I found
Patricia.
I found the female character to be interesting.
But she wasn't the main character.
No, she was a supporting character.
Michelle was just like, geez. I don't know if that actor's gone on to do anything else, but if he has, I don't want to see it.
I don't know, maybe. It's hard to say. Like, I don't know anything about it. But I think the mark of a mostly good director would be to do things slightly more conventionally and then only do a few weird things.
Yeah.
To make it more like, okay, we are going for something at this moment, but not breaking from the story too much.
Exactly, yeah. Because just because you do something different than everybody else is doing doesn't automatically make you brilliant.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it was inspirational to filmmakers that have taken what was cool here and made it better in other movies.
Right. Like, did you find anything entertaining about this? I was counting the minutes. I couldn't wait for it to be over. In fact, when we had like 20 minutes left, my brain was like, can we just watch the rest of this on double speed so that we can get to the podcast?
I found it interesting enough.
Why?
I wasn't bored out of my head.
Bored out of your tree?
Yeah.
Who used to say that? Was that our film professor?
It's possible. It sounds like something your dad would say. I don't know. So, I don't know. I found the stylistic flair interesting. Sometimes I'm a bit of a hipster, so I like sort of the mumblecore elements of it, of people just chatting. But what I prefer is more something like what they did in 400 Blows, where it was like they're chatting, but it's character related and reveals something about their story.
I thought you were going to say something more like Before Sunrise.
Well, Before Sunrise, it's a lot of that reveals something about the character.
Yeah.
So it's either you learn about their nature, you learn about their motivations, you learn about their past and how they became the way that they were through their storytelling.
Yeah. I didn't think there was much of that in this.
No.
He was just like, hey, I want to sleep with you. She was like, whatever. And he's like, yeah, but let's sleep together.
Well, I think that's why I found her character more interesting, was we actually learned stuff about her. That she's, American, she's a student, she's a journalist, she's independent, she wants to make money and be on her own, that kind of stuff. Whereas we didn't really learn much about Michelle.
Not that I cared to learn.
Yeah. So, I have a passage to read from the Wes Anderson collection.
Oh, here we go. She's getting up. She's walking across the room. She's picking up a big old book. Bumping the book against the table.
I think particularly the 400 Blows. Like, I think Wes Anderson has a very Parisian feel. Like, he even lives in Paris now, probably because he loves French films so much. Mm-hmm. And one of his favorite directors is Francois Truffaut. And, there's quite a few shots in Rushmore. Like, there's a comparison in the book between shots in the 400 Blows and Rushmore. Like, how he sort of composed it to be similar. Yep. And, same with The Graduate. There's a lot of shots like that in Rushmore. And, Wes Anderson is definitely a cinema-loving director. Like, you can feel what he takes inspiration from. Like
Tarantino as well as
director. That's part of what makes their work so good, especially as someone that likes movies. You're like, oh, it was from this and stuff. Like in the 400 Blows, the school-like music felt very similar to the school-like music in Rushmore. So in Rushmore, basically it was like English rockers, which he said is sort of like Max's vibe, and the others is more like a school, like academy sound, which was very similar, sort of like the chimey type music, like like that kind of thing. So this is out of the Wes Anderson collection, and the interviewer is asking him about Francois Truffaut and the 400 Blows, and this is what Wes Anderson has to say. Truffaut in general. The first film of his I saw was the 400 Blows. That was a huge rock band type impression on me when I saw it. It's one of those films where you say, not only did I just enjoy this experience, now I think I would like to model my future on this somehow. Really? Yeah. So it's like that meme where it's like you get something and you're like, this is going to become my identity now. Have you seen that? No. Where it's like, for photographers, it's like you get a camera for your 11th birthday. You're like, this is going to become my identity now.
Wow. Quite the meme.
So it's like that for him, where it's like his mind is blown and he's like, all right, and now I'm a filmmaker. So it speaks to the volumes of how this film has affected his career as a whole. And particularly films like Moonrise Kingdom and Rushmore, where it's coming of age tales about kids and their journey and everything. Particularly in Rushmore and in Moonrise Kingdom, those are children that don't have attention from adults. And they're seeking attention otherwise. So it's vaguely similar to Antoine and his journey.
And how does all this relate to your enjoyment of the film?
Well, I just find it interesting that one of my favorite directors, Wes Anderson, was so impacted by the 400 Blows that it seeped into his movies. And I like seeing the legacy of filmmaking. Like, one movie can impact someone and it can make something great. And, just in general, I love coming-of-age movies. I love mumblecore movies, and I loved this little tale. I loved seeing Antoine. I love going through the streets of Paris, and I just really connect with the idea of growing up and, not really knowing, being directionless. That's sort of a very mumblecore philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I enjoyed it. I would watch it again, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that was Truffaut, I'd be interested to see other films.
We watched part
Truffaut.
of it.
Yeah, we watched
Day for Night
on your birthday a couple of years ago. But I think we had a bit of wine and it was getting kind of sleepy. So we stopped in the middle and never finished it. It went on the great unfinished.
Yeah.
Our list of movies that we stopped halfway through, which we might do an episode talking just about that list at some point.
Maybe.
I would like to do that.
Sure. I definitely think that Truffaut is a director that I'm very interested in learning more about. I think a good indication of what you would like as a person is if the person that you likes those things, you would probably like those things. Like Wes Anderson is a big Kubrick fan, and so am I. And, he likes Truffaut, and, I like his films. So if he's inspired by Truffaut, then maybe I would be inspired by Truffaut. It's just an idea.
Yeah, I get a lot of that with James Rolfe because I watch so much James Rolfe content on the internet over the years. And my initial education of films made before my time were from James Rolfe reviews, where he reviewed, Back to the Future and all the Rockies and Rambo and then old horror movies and all that. And I ended up really taking to a lot of those movies. Evil Dead. I first heard about Evil Dead from James Rolfe. So I would agree with that, if you're a fan of somebody, look at what that somebody is a fan of. And that might be your thing as well.
I think it's definitely a good starting point anyways, because if you already have shared interests, then it's probably going to be easy to, if it's you have a friend that likes some of the stuff that they're into and they recommend it to you, it's the same sort of thing. So I'm definitely interested in that.
Yeah, but Godard not interested in anything else that he has to offer now.
I don't want to write him off because it was his first movie.
Never say never. I'm just being hyperbolic. But
I mentioned this earlier.
Not impressed.
That his style of filmmaking was very similar to how El Mariachi was made. So obviously we've talked about this before. We talked about Rebel Without a Crew. We talked about El Mariachi.
Yeah.
So Godard was sort of low budget, trying to do it on the cheap filmmaker, do things without permits. In fact, he didn't really have a full script. He would feed actors their lines, which is very similar to Robert. And, because they were recording on the real streets of Paris, didn't block off streets.
Yeah, that was apparent.
Yeah, and the camera was loud, like Robert Rodriguez's. They didn't record sound, or they had to redub their voices to match, which might have been part of the jarringness.
I noticed that. I definitely noticed that because there was a scene where Michel puts down, he throws down a magazine right next to him. And he's like, "Ugh," and it doesn't make a noise when it hits the pillow. And I was like, this whole scene's probably overdubbed, isn't it? The whole movie's probably overdubbed. Yeah.
But someone like Robert Rodriguez is a really great editor, so he's able to make it a little more seamless. Whereas a movie like this,
well, it wasn't the dubbing of the voices that stuck out to me.
The lack of Foley.
Yeah, it was the Foley. Yeah. That's the Foley artist's fault.
Well, there probably wasn't a Foley artist.
Right.
I don't know if you noticed this, but no cast or crew was credited in the film.
I did not notice. I did not.
So there was maybe I don't know. I want to say 6 crew members or something. There was pretty low budget affair.
It shows.
Well, I don't know.
Well, just it shows in its lack of quality control, I would say. Another thing, the music was not for me. None of it felt motivated by what was happening on screen. Every time music came up in the film, it felt incongruous to what was happening. Once or twice, it was oh, I guess this song kind of fits this scene a little bit. But most of the time, it was this music does not match what I'm seeing. Yeah.
I think I have a problem with that. We talk about this sometimes as Mad Men had terrible needle drops.
Yeah.
Whereas they're just putting the song in because they think it's cool or period appropriate and not actually making the scene better.
The biggest one in Mad Men that pissed me off was when Don puts on Tomorrow Never Knows from the Beatles' Revolver, and he plays it for like maybe a minute and then shuts it off. I'm like, get out of here. Let the song finish. You're telling me you don't like that? Get out of here.
Well, I think they probably just didn't want to play more of the song.
Then they should have just faded out. Like, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
Don sucks.
What I just think it was annoying because that show had such a big budget by the end, and they were able to get such great songs, but they didn't figure out a way to make it make sense.
Yeah.
We were watching a video about the new Elvis movie where they're like, there's these terrible needle drops that it was like, it just didn't work.
Yeah, they like mix this music that's happening on camera in like the 50s with like Doja Cat.
It's like, maybe that could be interesting if you were going for a certain vibe, but the problem was it was just like a straight biopic. It's not like they were trying to go for like sort of more fantasy sequences, do it sort of like more creative.
Well,
and,
you haven't seen it, so you don't know.
No, but I saw those clips and I was like, every time I saw those clips, I was kind of like, get out of town. Like, what the heck is this movie?
Yeah. The movie Elvis was definitely fantastical, but not like to the point of Rocket Man. Where Rocket Man was like, it's very clear that everything happening on screen did not happen in real life. Like, playing piano at the bottom of a pool or whatever. It's a great movie though.
It's easy to take more creative license in doing stuff like that because it's like, oh, it's a dream sequence.
Yeah. But Elvis was kind of like half and half, where a lot of it was like really crazy, fantastical, but then most of it was kind of grounded. I don't know. It wasn't great.
That's Baz Luhrmann's trademark though, and I don't really particularly love him as a director.
Yeah. I had high hopes for Moulin Rouge, and it was a pile of garbage.
The idea of it sounded great. But the execution of it was not good. I was like, oh, Ewan McGregor in like a historic piece singing modern songs? That sounds pretty fun. Like, I'm on board. And then just like, it just wasn't good. I think part of the reason I didn't like it was because Nicole Kidman sucks.
Also, Ewan McGregor didn't have a beard. So, big point against it.
That's so true.
Do you have a beard in Big Fish? Big Fish was so good he didn't need it, but...
He had that iconic blue suit in the Daisy Field, though, so that's a million points up.
I feel like we've mentioned Big Fish on the podcast several times
Probably.
now.
Well, he didn't have a beard in Trainspotting 1 either, and that was such an iconic look, like the heroin chic, literally.
Wow.
Anyways...
If there's ever a sign that we're going off the rails, it's mentioning heroin chic.
I'm excited to watch more good French movies. Mm-hmm. Maybe like a French Christmas movie, perhaps. I'm excited to watch more good mumblecore and coming-of-age movies. Godard, I don't know.
Yeah. Were there any other movies on your short list? I know you mentioned one.
Yeah.
But
Cleo was the main one.
Like, what other French New Wave films are most famous?
Well, The 400 Blows came out 1959. Then also another movie came out 1959. And then Breathless came out in 1960. And those are credited with the birth of New Wave. So let me look up. Oh, so
because I feel like there's a really famous one that's name is like on the tip of my tongue, but I can't put it into words.
It's possible. What I'm seeing here is Alain Renaud's Hiroshima Mon Amour, 1959. Well, okay, Jacques Tati, Playtime.
Jacques Tati.
That's French, right?
Playtime?
Playtime.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Oh.
So that movie, I think, is actually more regarded.
Is that not newer? Is that not in color?
It is in color, but I think it came out in the 1960s.
Okay, yeah.
So, if you think about it, like, black and white, I think these movies were black and white because they were low budget.
Yeah.
Color was around back then, or at least, like, Technicolor, where they were painting the film strips, like, in Rebel Without a Cause.
Right. I might have mentioned this before, but I felt so lied to by the first couple of movies from the 60s that I watched. The first movies from the 60s that I watched was like Psycho and Hard Day's Night, which are both black and white. So I was like, oh, okay. movies are black and white in the 60s.
No.
And it wasn't until later that I figured out that they were only black and white to save money, whereas like there's color movies in like the 40s.
It just hadn't fully translated over.
Yeah.
Like, there was just, like, hold off. Like, we still have, like, 1080p, even though 4K has been around for ages. And so, it's just like that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Having a movie in black and white can help you focus more on the actual substance and the dialogue and the plot a little bit more, which I feel like is why mumblecore movies like Frances Ha sometimes are in black and white.
Good point. I didn't even think about that. I mean, I don't shy away from black and white. Like, one of my favorite shows is I Love Lucy. And, like, maybe one episode was filmed in color.
Right.
And so it doesn't bother me. But I think with modern films, I don't love the idea of black and white all the time, because sometimes it feels like they're just putting it in black and white just because they think it's cool and it serves no purpose.
Okay.
Like, I think for a movie like Frances Ha, they were going for a certain tone, which is fine. I liked it in that. But I think other times they just like, oh, we just want to make it black and white because it's cool.
Like what?
I don't know. I can't even think of an example.
Well, yeah. So to me, a black and white film is to be more stripped down, less sort of like color-related symbolism, and just to less distractions from the topic at hand.
What I think bothers me is when, you know, a new movie, it has like a black and white scene, but we're supposed to be like aware of color. It's like, well, why is it in black and white then?
I'm staring at the painting that I painted for you of the French Dispatch as you say that,
Okay.
which is a movie full of contrasting black and white scenes versus color scenes.
It was very purposeful, though, because all the black and white scenes were the journalist stories that were in the last French Dispatch
right
release.
Yeah. Whereas the color scenes was stuff that was not included, because like they'll cut to color sometimes in the middle of a scene,
but that makes it like, so that's a very good use of cinematography choice, where it's like sometimes in like a show or a movie they'll have two different color gradings. It'll be like sepia tone-ish to be like, oh, this was in the past.
You talking 13 Reasons Why?
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Whereas, like, the newer stuff was more, like, blue tones, cool
yeah.
tones, and then the other stuff was warm tones.
I do
Very
like that kind of thing. If there's
It's very
intentionality behind it,
very
if there's
easy.
reasoning for either coloring it a certain way or having it in black and white, that's great.
So, I don't have a problem with that in French Dispatch at all.
Yeah.
Like, there was a choice there. It was to show that it was before, but just for the sake of it, don't love it.
Right.
One thing I did want to mention about Breathless is, while I was watching it, I was thinking that it's the type of movie you would see a character in a movie watching.
Yes.
Right?
I was thinking that same thing. I didn't have that conscious thought, but it was more of like a subconscious thought, like towards the end.
Where it's like, you know, you see all the time in movies and shows, people just watching like a black and white movie, sort of an avant-garde movie, and it's just like playing. It's like, it feels like that.
Yeah.
That's the best
feels like a
purpose
fake
of it.
movie.
A fake movie, sort of.
Yeah. What did I say that? I said that about Bad Boys too, right? Bad Boys feels like the fake action movie that somebody's watching on the TV in the background of a better movie. This is like the fake French. Yeah.
Like it reminds me of Tropic Thunder. So like
Yeah.
Bad Boys is like
Yeah.
fake action movie, and this is like the fake French movie.
Yeah. I feel like I saw like parodies of this kind of thing in like Rugrats All Grown Up, when like Tommy's trying to be a filmmaker.
It definitely gives a very French nostalgic vibe, like the classic striped pieces that Patricia wears is sort of like quote unquote French girl style, which I said.
Yeah, and I said that was so ironic because she's not actually French.
Yeah,
She's
but
American.
It's so real French girls, you know, dress a certain way, a little more bohemian or, you know, whatever, a little more casual, smart casual. Whereas something, if you're in like in a fashion community like I am, is there's quote unquote French girl styles where it's like an American girl is trying to emulate a French girl. So that's kind of like what Patricia is doing. And so in that way, it is accurate. It's what an American would think is Parisian style.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm washing my hands of the whole Breathless experience. And welcoming more experiences like the 400 Blows.
100%. I'm really excited to watch the Italian movies because I don't think I've seen any old Italian movies.
Right.
So,
well, you're picking the Italian ones. I remember studying Italian neorealism in film, which I sort of remember what that is.
The Bicycle Thieves.
Right.
So that's, again, cinema verite, where it's more similar to the 400 Blows.
Right. Well, so it's like French New Wave is like, come on, people. The Italians were doing this 20 years ago. What are you doing?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how old The Bicycle Thieves is.
I'm just joshing around. But we're going to have to wait on that because next episode is going to be some Christmas flicks.
Yeah. Flicks.
Some flicks. I used to really dog on that term of like...
It's fine. I don't love it.
Referring to movies as flicks, referring to headphones as cans. I used to be like, have some respect for what you're talking about. But now I'm like, whatever.
It is jokey. I don't love people saying it all the time.
Yeah, not all the time.
I do think it's fun to say motion picture. It's like, well, that's what it is, but no one really calls it that.
Yeah. Anyway, so look forward to our Christmas episode coming out close to Christmas. Not sure what we're going to watch yet, but I've got some things in mind.
I've got some things in mind too.
Well, great.
And then in the new year, right? The new year, we'll be watching Japanese and Italian.
Yeah.
And I'm learning Italian, so maybe this will be a good lesson to me.
You could do the intro to that episode in Italian.
Okay.
All right. Au revoir.
Ciao.